Sorry, we'll make a start. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the School of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences at the University of Bradford Guest Lecture Series 2000 to 2021. So this evening, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Andrew Peterson, who has worked with Karina Croucher in the department with Adrian Evans. So Karina is going to give us a brief introduction to Andrew, and then we'll start the presentation. Thank you, Karina.
Okay, thanks everyone. So, yeah, I've had the pleasure of working with Andrew for a few years now via BANIA, the British Association for Near Eastern Archaeology. We both sit on the steering committee together. And oh, where we can see
just appeared, yeah.
And Andrew is a professor at the University of Wales in Trinity St David, where he is Director of Research in Islamic archaeology. So he carries out research in a number of countries in the Middle East and Africa, such as Jordan, Iraq, Palestine, Turkmenistan, the UAE, Syria, Qatar, maybe not Syria at the moment, but has done in the past. And it's really exciting. He works on Islamic archaeology, which for us is, we've been trying to incorporate more contemporary and more global archaeology and heritage within what we think about in Bradford. And so we're really excited to have Andrew here talking about that today. His works include writing about the archaeology of the Syrian Hajj route in medieval and Ottoman periods, and the archaeology of towns in Muslim Palestine. And I know he's working more broadly on an edited volume on Islamic archaeology. So it's really, really exciting to see. And just by way of introduction to the topic, obviously, we're talking about Old Azra, investigations of Islam's first urban settlement outside of the Arabian Peninsula. And Iraq is famous for its pre-Islamic heritage. Most people have heard of Sumerian or Babylonian periods. But Islamic period heritage is also of major international significance, yet is relatively understudied by comparison. And Basra in particular has relevance for us in the UK. It's been invaded twice by British troops, both during World War I and again in 2003. So it can be argued that we have a certain amount of regional responsibility when it comes to its heritage. And we've recently seen the inauguration of the Basra Museum recognising that. So yeah, for us it's really important to think about global aspects of heritage, and I shall hand over now to Andrew to hear about the topic of today. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, thank you very much, Karina. Thanks you for the introduction, and thank you, Ben. I'm very happy to be able to talk about this subject. I'm very happy to be invited by the University of Bradford to talk about this, because I suppose it's become one of my main projects, and also I think it's one of the projects that I'm most passionate about at the moment, for a number of reasons. I mean, I suppose the reasons are, as Karina outlined, is one of the things is Basra was exceptionally important to Islamic civilization, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And also because when I first became interested in Islamic archaeology, Islamic society, it was actually through working in Iraq with Alistair Northedge in Samarra many years ago. And since that point, there's been at least 2 wars in Iraq, which had made returning to Iraq very, very difficult. So I was really pleased to have the opportunity about 4 years ago to actually start working in Iraq again, starting on a project. So that's kind of a personal thing. And also I feel that given what's happened to Iraq and in Iraq due to various wars and invasions, I think Iraq's got quite a bad press, and people really don't, although they hear Iraq a lot on the news, and in terms of conflict, sectarian conflict, violence, ISIS, of course, all this sort of thing. I think what that has done is given people a very sort of unfortunate view of Iraq and seen it as in a very negative terms, whereas certainly its heritage has been during the Islamic period has been very, very important to the development of Muslim civilization worldwide. And so, and Basra within that is very, very important. Now, one of the most famous scholars to study Basra was the French professor Massignon, and he's really the only person. He was the first person to really try to integrate the Arabic descriptions of Basra with the remains of the old city. But his summary of Basra and its importance, I think, is worth repeating. He said that Basra was the crucible of Muslim culture between the 1st and 4th century. So that's from 634 to 923. And he argued that it was actually the most important place in the Islamic world during the first 4 centuries of Islam. So that's saying quite a lot, given the position of Iraq. So Basra. So now I'll just show you a few slides telling you a bit about where Basra is located and sort of the context of Basra, why it's built, and then a little bit about the survey work that I've been involved in so far, and also the hopes in the future to actually be able to carry out excavations. So first thing I think I'd like to show you is a map of the Islamic world. This is a map of the Islamic world during the Umayyad period. Basra was actually founded before the Umayyad period. So Basra was founded in 634, so it's barely 2 years after the death of Muhammad. And as such, it was really the first settlement outside Arabia founded by Arabs. So if you look at this map, you'll see Mecca, which of course is the center of the Muslim faith. It's where the Kaaba is. And also you can see on the map in Arabia, you'll see Medina, which was the city to which Muhammad migrated when he's forced to leave Mecca. And so those are the two principal Muslim cities. But the thing about both of those places, they both existed in pre-Islamic times. So these were cities that had existed before Islam and became very strongly associated with Islam and important both to the culture and the religion, but they existed before. And then also, if you look up above there, you'll see Syria and Palestine, Damascus, Jerusalem, etc. These were also important to early Islamic civilization. But again, these were mostly cities that already existed, existing cities. So Basra is very different from this. Basra was a settlement which was made by Arabs during their conquest to conquer all this area. That was so that's North Africa, Iran, Afghanistan, right over into present-day Pakistan, and as far west as Spain. These were all conquered in the early years of the Arab expansion. And to carry out this expansion, particularly to the east, the Arabs used to travel through Arabia to the Tigris and the Euphrates, and from there they'd make their conquests, Islamic conquests, into the eastern part of Iran and Afghanistan, and these were essentially something like extended versions of traditional tribal raids, in a sense, even though the tribes were unified at this time. So they were seen as seasonal migrations, in a sense, and initially the Arab tribes used to return to Arabia, where they felt more culturally at home, and they felt this was their spiritual home. So they'd make their sorties, out into the wider Middle East, but they had this idea that they should return to Arabia, and this is very strongly rooted in the psyche of the early Arab Muslims. But by the time of the death of Muhammad, there was a feeling that actually this was too difficult, and so the Arabs created a camp in Iraq, at the place where Basra is located on this map, and they created a camp so that after their conquests, they could return to what was technically part of Arabia, but was actually much closer. So they didn't have to travel so far home. And so this is the city of Basra. So Basra was the first camp. It was founded by the general Utbah ibn Ghazwan, and he was the general of the second caliph, Caliph Omar, and he created this camp as a place so the Arab tribes wouldn't have to return all the way to various locations within Arabia, but they could have a place that was much more convenient. So the idea was the army could be here, and also their families, and essentially this was just a very large camp. And originally the encampment was tents, and then later through various reorganizations they converted these tents into reed huts, and then there's only later that they started building in mud brick and then fired brick. So they gradually upgraded the building materials, and this is really a reflection of the confidence they had in the location of Basra. And then they even had to reorganize the street plans, reorganize where the markets were, because the settlement became so populous, so cosmopolitan, so successful that they actually really needed to reorganize it. An idea where Basra is within Iraq. You can see this smaller map, and you can see on here Baghdad, which was founded nearly 100 years later, over 100 years later than Basra. But the two earliest cities created in Iraq, Muslim cities, were Kufa and Basra. And to this day, there's a certain amount of disagreement between Kufa and Basra over which city was founded first. Interestingly, Kufa has a more religious, to religious people, it has more of a resonance. But Kufa was essentially much more of a religious place, whereas Basra was both religiously important, because you get within this early settlement, you get the development of many things which later became fundamental to Islamic civilization. So, for example, in religious terms, you get Sufism, Shiism, and very many other branches of early Islam developed in Basra. You got a lot of intellectual development in Basra. You also got literature, particularly poetry, being created in early Islamic Basra. And is really, as Massignon said, it's really the crucible of early Arab Muslim society. And you also get, because of its location, you can see on this map, it's on the, it's located quite near the Shatt al-Arab, which is this waterway, which is the confluence of both the Tigris and the Euphrates. So it's at the head of two major rivers. So it's important, obviously, for river commerce, but it also opens into the Persian Gulf. And obviously from the Persian Gulf, it opens into the Indian Ocean. So it's ideally placed to sort of dominate both riverine and maritime trade. And this is seen very early on, because you get, it was able to benefit from the monsoon trade and to India, China, and further east, and also to Africa. And we also have reports that very early on in Basra, we have Hindu music being performed. So you get this very cosmopolitan feel very early on in Basra. Sorry, I'll just skip this because these are just pictures of Kufa, but okay, Basra. So one of the things that's difficult about Basra is that obviously Basra is sort of reasonably well known in modern times as a city in the second most populous city in Iraq. And many people assume that this is the location of the early Islamic site, but actually the early Islamic site is located at this place just to the southwest of Basra called Az-Zubayr. So this is the location of the early Islamic site, which I'll let you know more about. But the other thing just to notice from this map is you'll see that you're dealing with a very complex topography in southern Iraq. So you've got the outflow into the Persian Gulf, you've got the Fao Peninsula, and you've also got this sort of estuary called the Khor az-Zubayr, and that's basically a tidal inlet. And during earlier times, and at the time of the settlement of the early Basra, this would have been connected by canal to the marshes to the north. Okay, so this is just a view of the present-day Basra, taken in from the Dutch map drawing from 1677, and this shows what most people understand as this is the modern city of Basra, which was founded probably in about the 12th century. So this is what most people understand by Basra, but early Islamic Basra is, and this is just another view of the Basra of today and the heart of that Basra, and it's a city built on canals, and Iraqis often call it the Venice of Iraq, and it's really a dense network of canals running through the old city, and it's also got a very distinctive architecture. This is made of carved wood, mashrabiyah, plus fired brick and mud brick. I'm just showing you this picture because this house apparently was the house used by Gertrude Bell soon after the invasion of Iraq in the First World War. Okay, so that's, and again, I'll just so you can see on here, that's the Basra that I was referring to, which is on the Shatt al-Arab. But our site, the early Islamic site, is just to the south of this in Zubayr. This map, incidentally, is just showing you the oil fields around there, which is, I think, probably quite a lot of the reason for the interest in Basra in later times. Okay, so the first scholar to really look at Basra was Massignon in the early 20th century, and this is his kind of map of Basra, showing, you can see this this line running from the top left-hand corner to the bottom right, and that's the Palakopus channel, and this is this canal which linked the site of what is later to become Zubayr, but the early Islamic site. This linked it to the Persian Gulf and also further north to via the marshes to the Euphrates. And this is Massignon's attempt to reconcile what he knew from the sources, the Arabic sources, with the topography. So here you can see various tribal names, and this is where he thought they were settled in relation to the topography. I mean, I don't really want you to get too to look at this in too detailed a way, because one of the problems is trying to force the historical description onto the topography, and it's not necessarily that successful. So here's another more schematic view looking at Basra, developed from Massignon, and this shows the tribal divisions in the early Islamic city of Basra. So you can see at the center, or near the center of the settlement, is the mosque, and there you've got the people of basically these were people who were people of the family of the early Islamic family, and then the Abd al-Qais group. These are tribal groups, and then also you can see the main streets which may have bisected the city. Now, the thing to say about this is entirely conjectural. The only thing that's really known is the course of the canal, which as I say, linked the Persian Gulf with the Euphrates River. And just another point about this site, the importance about this site is that the Arabs had the idea that they didn't want to be separated from Arabia by a river or any watercourse, so they could go straight back to Arabia if they wanted to. So this is like the northernmost limit of Arabia in one sense. Now, I should say a little bit about the markets in Basra are very important and very famous. And this is just quite interesting because this is a market underneath the motorway bridge, but it's actually located on one of the probable sites of the early markets in Al-Basra. And here you have another reconstruction of the possible locations, again from literature, of where the various markets were located within Basra. And there were many different types of markets, and we know that including second-hand markets, there was markets for tents, there's markets for fruit, for all sorts of things. So there's a plethora of different type of market areas. And the other thing to notice, down on the bottom left, you see a number of markets. These are the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and these were located on the routes from Arabia. So these were an extended area where there's a lot of trading, where tribes would bring supplies, I suppose, to the armies which were camped at the city. The other thing which we know from the early Islamic sources is that it was the very early settlement was meant to be very disorganized, there are a lot of problems with sanitation, with water supply, etc. So the picture we get is of a very economically successful place, but just very early on, very disorganized, simply because it wasn't originally designed as a permanent settlement. And so I just mentioned that the first settlement was built mainly with goat hair tents, traditional Bedouin tents, and then later on they built more permanent dwellings like this one, which were built using palm trunks and pieces of mangrove wood, and then they're covered with reeds. So this is just I suppose the second stage of the type of dwellings that they would have had in early Islamic Basra. Okay, so that's just a general introduction to the city. The map you can see now is an archaeological map produced by the State Board of Antiquities during the 1986, showing you demarcating the archaeological area of Basra. So roughly in the center, you can see what has become the modern city of Zubayah, which is built on the remains of the early Islamic city. But then around there, everywhere around there is there are traces of early Islamic occupation. So this is the area, and during the 1970s, the State Board of Antiquities reserved this whole area for archaeology, realizing the fundamental importance of this site. Just in the top north, right-hand side on the north, that is the road that goes to what is today called Basra, which is on the Shatt al-Arab. So just to remember that the early Islamic Basra was not located on the Shatt al-Arab, but on this Ubala canal. So there's different ways of investigating and connecting the early Islamic sources with the archaeology and the present day topography. One way, which I'll just mention, which has been done quite recently, is looking at the city of Al-Zubayr, which was built in the 16th century, so it's quite old, basically in early Ottoman times, and it was a settlement of Arabs from the Al-Hassa region in Arabia, and they fled north into Iraq in the 16th century, and they created this city. But there's a strong feeling that this city probably incorporated some of the remains, still standing remains of the early Islamic city. And here you can see some attempt to kind of locate the interface between the two. And again, there's been an attempt to look at the street pattern of the old city of Zubayr and perhaps connect it with the street pattern of the early Islamic city. Unfortunately, none of this is backed up with any actual excavation. It's just done on plan analysis. And so we don't really know how much this actually relates to the early Islamic city. Okay, so just again to show that relationship. So here's Zubayr, the city founded in the 16th century. And this is a topographical map produced in the 1930s, British map. And again, you can see this sort of V shape, inverted V shape, with the road to the modern town of Basra. And just to the south of that, you can see Al Jama, and that's the site of the mosque. And I should say that the location of this mosque, which is the first which is identified as the first mosque in Basra, has been known since at least the 16th century and probably the 14th century, Ibn Battuta, even though the city itself, the early Islamic city of Basra, which was destroyed, I should have said that it was destroyed in the 10th century, 900s, by the Karamathians. And so after that, there seems to have been a shift to what is now the present day city of Basra. The exact process by which this took place is not really that well understood, and we're really going on documents, but we don't know the extent to which the early Islamic city was actually abandoned in the 10th century. Okay. Now, so that's just a general background, and now I'll say a little bit about the archaeological survey project, which we've been working on for the last 3 years. And this has been based on using a number of techniques, which include aerial survey using a drone, geophysical survey using an auger, and also a ground survey looking at excavation sites and also visible surface remains within the site of Basra. So to carry out the UAV survey, we used this small drone, which is a Phantom quadricopter, and this was flown at a height of 150 meters over the uninhabited areas of the site. There's obviously security issues about flying the drone over inhabited areas, but really part of the idea of this survey is to document the still uninhabited areas of the city, and also to check for encroachments on that area, on that designated archaeological site. So the quadricopter was used at a height of 150 meters, and a series of overlapping images were linked to fixed points on the ground, and these were located using a differential GPS to now, the accuracy of this terrain modeling was checked using a mobile antenna, just driving around the site. And then from that, we produced a photomosaic, which was processed to form a 3D relief map, which has an accuracy to within 2 centimeters. And so this is just this is just a photograph showing the ground checking using the differential GPS to get the control points. And this is a map showing you the aerial survey zone. So the mosque, which I showed you on earlier maps, which is known as the Mosque of Khatwa Ali, which is rather the footprint of Ali. So it's not actually Ali's mosque, but it's a mosque where Ali, who's Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, where he preached. So it's famous in that respect. And so you can see that's marked on the zip. But the aerial survey zone takes in all this green area, which is not presently inhabited and which is still reserved for archaeology and heritage purposes. And so this is one example of the photo mosaic. So again, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see an aerial view of the mosque, which has today been to a certain extent rebuilt, although you can still see the outline of the earlier Islamic structure. One of the problems is we're not sure exactly how earlier this structure is, but so here's, this is a photo mosaic, and just on the left-hand side, you can see the encroachment of the modern city of Zubair onto the earlier archaeological site. The other thing you should be able to appreciate from this is the complexity of the topography. Much of this is man-made. It's things like irrigation ditches, but there's also even on here trenches which were dug on the instructions of Saddam Hussein to stop the British invasion of Iraq in 2003. So there's a huge array of different periods represented by the features which are shown on this map. And then, in addition to the photo mosaic, we also produced this digital terrain map. And again, this is just a detail showing, again, the mosque, the site of the early Islamic mosque. And again, this ditch, which I'll be referring to in the future, which seems to run around the mosque. So therefore was probably, we think, was probably created after the mosque. So the second element, so that was, we're talking about the UAV survey. The second element is geophysical survey, and that involves looking at the geology of the city, and so basically there's two main layers here. There's a lower layer which is predominantly alluvial sand. And this is Martin Bates, who was responsible for the geophysical survey, standing in what is a sand quarry to the northwest of Basra. And so this is which we use for calibrating the augering. So we used a sand auger to dig into the site and produce a series of boreholes, which would give us some indication both of the type of buried deposits and also their depth. And this was partly to assist in determining the most useful areas to excavate, but also there's also to give us some actual dates, radiocarbon dates, again to give an idea of the earliest settlement and the range of occupation layers within the site. So a view of the sand augering taking place, and this is a sort of a typical landscape on the site of the early Islamic city, and then in the background you can see just some houses and some trees representing the gradual encroachment of the town of Zubair onto the site of the early Islamic city. These are just, so we carried out boreholes in geoarchaeological survey in two main areas. So area A, which is just to the south of the mosque, and also in area B up here, which is located near what we think was the edge of the early Islamic city. So the idea of this is one series of boreholes within what we presume was the center of the early Islamic city, and one on the edge to see if there's a change in the density of occupation and also in the type of occupation, and also to pick up any other features which might demarcate the edge of the city. So that's the geoarchaeological survey. The other element was ground survey, looking at excavations, archaeological excavations which had taken place within the designated reserved archaeological area of the old city, the early Islamic city. I should say that to many people this may be surprising, but there's a lot of development within the Basra region. This is partly because of the intensive oil exploration in the area, which means, and this again puts pressure on for building land within the area, and so there's been a lot of pressure to actually build within the archaeological zone, and Katan Balid who's the director of antiquities for the Basra region, is very keen to have the survey work carried out as much as anything to indicate the importance of the site to local people. Okay, so and the other part of the ground survey is picking up ceramics from sites within the from the site. So here you can see a very typical form of early Islamic ceramics known as turquoise glazed ware, and this dates from the early Islamic period, from about the 7th century, and again you can just see the kiln the stilt marks on these pots, and these pots were probably used for exporting dates from Basra, and they're exported worldwide. So, for example, fragments of these jars have been found as far afield as Mindanao in the Philippines, Mozambique in southern Africa, and also they've even found a few examples of fragments of this jar of jars of this type in East Anglia. So they're very, very widely distributed, and I think points to the massive long-distance trade connections that Basra had worldwide at this stage, and also gives you a hint at its mercantile importance. And another view of the ceramics. This is three sherds of whiteware rim, which were retrieved from the site. Now, the top two examples were what is called whiteware, tin opacified whiteware. So it's where the glaze, you get a buff fabric, which is fired, and then on top of that, it's glazed, and the glaze is made opaque white by the addition of tin and possibly manganese. And often these types of pots are also decorated with cobalt blue decoration, often inscriptions or just simple devices. And then below that, the very shiny fragment of pottery is Chinese whiteware, porcelain, which was imported to Basra. And so it's generally accepted that the Iraqi ware was imitating the Chinese porcelain, and this is an innovation which took place in Basra. And again, this whiteware was exported very far afield to Africa, to India, to China, even as far as China. So this was an innovation which took place within Basra, the production of this this type of pottery. So again, Basra is extremely important in manufacturing terms. Okay, so what I was going to talk about now is give you just an idea of what remains on the ground within Basra. So this is an aerial view, an oblique photograph showing you some of the sites that have been excavated. So these are the sites which were excavated by the State Board of Antiquities, mostly during the 1980s. So you can see three sites here: Site 1, Site 2, and Site 3. So if we go first to site 1, now these sites of these houses, which you can see, have been partially reconstructed, but they're built on the foundations of buildings which are excavated, and in some cases they're still standing. So they've been consolidated, but the lower parts were actually excavated. One of the interesting features of this site is that some of the houses had something like a cellar or a serdab. Serdabs were special rooms which were dug below the ground to escape the extreme heat in the summer, because Basra is one of the hottest places you can go in the summer. And the residents built underground rooms where they'd retreat during the day in the summer, simply because of the extremely oppressive heat. It's usually thought that serdabs were a feature that was originally derived from Central Asia, from the Turks, but it's possible, given the early date of this structure, which is probably 9th century, that actually these were originally developed in Iraq or simultaneously developed. Site 2, which is near the antiquities office for the Basra region and for the site, which is located in the centre. But there's also a number of earlier buildings which you can see just behind the trees. And again, these were excavated during the 1980s. And this is just these buildings which have been consolidated. One of the most important features of these buildings is stucco, which is preserved inside. So you can see in this view of one of the doorways is stucco panels. Stucco was a very, very important part of Islamic architecture, and its most famous examples are at Samarra, and these are thought to have been very important to the development of Islamic architecture, Islamic decoration, Islamic motifs, crucial to the development of mosaics and all different forms of Islamic art. And the earliest forms were thought to be at Samarra, which is dated to the 9th century, 800s. But here we get possibly earlier. We're not exactly sure of the dates of these buildings, but they probably date from the 8th century rather than 9th century. And they've got these examples of stucco panels. And then site 3, this is a large palatial building. Again, this has been less drastically conserved, but because of that, it's possibly more interesting to look at. So you can see the various rooms built roughly around a courtyard with individual houses forming part of a larger palace. And you can just see on the right, you can see these semicircular buttresses. Again, the date of this structure is unclear, but we think it's probably from the 8th century, so it's possibly about the 700s. So again, quite early. And this is just a view of the site on the ground. Okay, so that's just 3 examples of the types of buildings which have been excavated and which remain within the archaeological site of early Islamic site of Basra. And now I'm just going to switch back to the mosque. This is an aerial view of the mosque, and you can see this outline. Now, obviously, most of that looks is not built over. It's just an enclosed area, and at the bottom you can see some modern structures. Now this is a view of the same area from 1930s, and so before all of that building took place. And what you can see in the centre is a building which was known to the RAF at the time in the 1930s as Sinbad's Tower. And there was a general assumption that this was actually the minaret of the mosque, but in fact, it appears to be probably one of the corner towers of a large enclosure wall which surrounded the mosque. So rather than being a freestanding tower, it's actually an engaged buttress tower. And also you can see various other features, like on the left-hand side, you can see a trench and possibly an outline of a building, which, if this does prove to be a building, would be very interesting, because it could possibly be a palace associated with the mosque, and therefore both very early and very significant. So this is in 1984, the Iraqis carried out an excavation at this site to determine both the extent and the nature of this mosque. And this is a plan that was produced. And these are some views of the excavation in progress. So you can see in the top picture, there's this so-called Sinbad's Tower, which is one of the engaged corners of the enclosure, which this excavation demonstrated. So where you can see these people standing, this was the outer wall of the enclosure. And then in the lower picture, again, you can see that standing tower, Sinbad's Tower, but also in the foreground you can see columns placed one on top of the other, or rounded stones. Now, this is interesting because one thing you may gather from the photographs you've already seen of the early Islamic site, there's not really that much stone or rock in southern Iraq, and the majority of building materials are either mud brick, date palms, reeds, or fired brick. So there's very, very little stone. But here you can see, okay, this is Sinbad's Tower as it is today. But here you can see these stones taken from our recent survey. And these stones have been quarried, and we've traced these origins to a rock outcrop near the border with Kuwait, which is about 50 miles away. So these stones were quarried and brought to produce columns which supported the early mosque. So the early mosque would have been huge. Again, you can see Sinbad's Tower roughly in the center, and to the left, the modern mosque, Shia mosque of Ali. So all the area that you're looking at here was within the confines of the early Islamic mosque, which makes it very huge. Now, the date of that mosque is not that clear, although Sinbad's Tower, I think, probably dates from the 10th or 11th century, so sort of reasonably late. But the stone columns may, appears, and there's another view of them, may date from earlier. Okay, so this is again another view of the mosque. So again, Sinbad's Tower there in the left-hand corner of the mosque enclosure. And so the form of this mosque enclosure was demarcated after the Iraqi excavations in the 1980s, and that was essentially the enclosure wall. And that was interpreted by the excavators as belonging to the Abbasid period, so roughly about the 8th century, 700s to 800s AD. And again, I'd like to draw your attention to this channel, which is on the right-hand side of the mosque, which seems to skirt the mosque, and therefore, as you say, probably was created after the mosque. And again, another view of the channel. You can see here lots of debris. So that this channel actually seems to have cut through structures. Here's another example. You can see the mosque, the channel actually either cut through a fired brick building here, or this is part of some bridge that crossed the channel. And so this is just a schematic diagram to show you what we think is happening here. So here in the center, you've got the mosque of Ali, and then the ancient water channel, which seems to skirt around the mosque. Okay, so now the other feature I'd like to draw, so that's one area of particular interest around the mosque, which obviously requires further investigation. And then the other area was the area off to the on the left-hand side of the screen, which is where we think is where the Iraqis marked the edge of the archaeological zone of Basra. And so we wanted to see exactly what this is. So we did geo-archaeological survey there, ground survey, and also aerial survey. And we found the remains of this linear mound, which we think probably represents a wall defining the western limit of the early Islamic city. And again, on this view, you can see that the wall's been slightly damaged, but you could see at the core what seems to be a high part of the wall, and then next to it just a smaller, perhaps a second skin to the wall. Again, we can see this in this photograph. One of the interesting things is, yeah, so in this photograph is exactly the same point. You can see the wall, and then next to it the same wall, same place, but within the space of 6 months between these two photographs, a house has been built right up next to the wall. So again, this work has a valuable conservation role in documenting many of these features in areas before they're destroyed. Again, you can see a little bit of the detail of the construction of this wall. So rather than being built of mud bricks, is built of paxa or rammed earth, held in place by molds, and you can see the layers that have been created here. So these are really big layers with liquid mud poured into the molds and then removed, and you get this characteristic layering with big blocks of mud brick. And again, just in the foreground, you can see these modern breeze blocks which have been laid down to create a house. So again, this section of the wall is very much in danger of disappearing. And one other feature of the wall which we discovered during the survey, you can see here being pointed to, this is a semicircular buttress attached to the outside of the wall. Again, the date of this wall, we're not sure of the exact date. We did some cores immediately in the vicinity of the of this wall to try and get some idea of its date, but unfortunately, the nature of the deposits meant it was not really possible to get either any dating material or really any idea of the sequence of depositions in the area. So, but we assume that this dates from at least the 10th century or earlier, because we know from in the 10th century the city was attacked by the Karamatai, and at that point we know that the city seems to have been largely abandoned, although the core may have remained there. So it's unlikely that a wall would have been built this far out at this late date. So probably dates from the 10th century or earlier. So that could be 9th or 8th century. And again, just a view of the encroachment on the wall. Okay, and finally, I'd like to show you some of the sort of more general results of our work from the analysis of the archaeological of the photographs, and these are the red represents the wall line. So the wall line which we detected, you can see just up on the left hand side, and we were able to trace this all the way around for most of the site. And then on the right-hand side, you can see where it says inundatable area. What we discovered, and this is a corona image from the 1960s, and you can see here the traces of ancient fields. So this seems to have been an area which is irrigated by multiple canals, irrigation canals. And you can even see the field systems outlined in these. And so these would have been periodically flooded by the rivers, and then the third element I'd like you to look at is the yellow linear feature, and this is this is the channel which I showed you before, which again outlines the mosque. So what it seems to be, what we're thinking may be the case, is that there's a contraction of the city in the possibly in the 10th century, and instead of a wall, that a canal or ditch or something like a moat was built around just to protect this area of the much reduced city, and no fortifications or walls were needed on the right and upper side of the area, because this was an area which was flooded most of the time. And we also know this from the from accounts of the invasion of Basra in Iraq from the First World War, when the British troops had to build a causeway from the modern city of Basra out to this area. So this area was just more or less impenetrable marshland, so it could be easily controlled just by using gateways or destroying part of the presumed causeway there. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and this is just a final picture to show the members of the team. And this sign in the background is a sign commemorating the fact that Basra was the first Muslim city built outside the Arabian Peninsula. And finally, I'd just like to say thanks to the State Board of Heritage and Antiquities of Iraq, which sponsored and permitted this work, the British Institute for the Study of Iraq, and the Max van Berchem Foundation, both for providing funding, and also all the members of the team, in particular Katan El-Balid, who's the Director of Antiquities for the Basra region, Alistair Northedge, my collaborator on the project, Martin Bates, a geoarchaeologist, Nawrust Al-Ayubi, an Iraqi geomorphologist who accompanied us during the survey and helped us to understand some of the complex geology, and Frank Stremke, who has carried out all the aerial survey work for the project. Okay. Thank you. Right, so pause share, I think. Is that right? Is that right? Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a fascinating lecture. Really, really interesting to see the site. It's not an area of archaeology which I have any particular knowledge of, so wonderfully something new for me this evening. We've had numerous comments coming in from a chat box on both the YouTube channel and from the Zoom channel saying thank you very much, and it sounds like a absolutely fantastic site and really significant site for Iraqi history and the history of the area. So thank you. Karina, do you want to start off with some questions? You're on mute still, Karina. You've turned on your video, but you're still on.
How many times a day have I said you're on mute? Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks, Andrew. Really, really interesting talk, and it's great for us to hear about that. We've actually got some questions coming in from the chat, so I'll go straight to one of those. So Mia has asked how you got into studying the archaeology of Basra.
Okay, yeah, I suppose when I first became, I became interested in Islamic archaeology a long time ago through studying Islamic history with Hugh Kennedy. And so that got me into the subject in general. And quite early on, I realized that what was interesting about Iraqi or Muslim civilization is the fact that it's actually, it's essentially a religion, but it's also a civilization. It came into being really during a time when people were writing, so within historical time. So it's actually, there's a possibility of tracing the development of a civilization from before it was there into its, really at its very, very earliest times. And of sites, the most important sites, I suppose, are obviously Mecca and Medina within Arabia. But to a certain extent, there's actual technical problems with working there. to do with the fact that they are actually functioning religious shrines, and also to do with certain views about archaeology within Saudi Arabia, which means that that's kind of out of the question. But the other thing is, as I mentioned earlier on, both of those cities were sort of existed before Islam, and also to a certain extent were very special sort of shrine cities, and therefore atypical. But Basra was a new settlement which from its very start was founded by people who are Muslim, and they happened to be mostly Arabs. And so I thought, if to actually understand the development of Islam as a civilization, Basra was a perfect place to do this. And so having the opportunity to work there, and I got the opportunity through meeting Katan al-Balid at a conference, and having the opportunity to do this was really amazing, because we have the potential to look into just the very origins of one of the world's major civilizations. So I think I think really the question is, it's more important to study this site than any other site if you're going to study Islamic archaeology. So it just seemed to me the obvious choice. I just didn't think that I'd actually be able to get the opportunity to do this. Okay.
And why do you think it is that Islamic archaeology seems so relatively understudied by comparison to other regions of archaeology?
Good. That's a really good question, because it's something I've been thinking about, well, quite a lot recently, actually. I think one of the reasons actually is, I think directly to do with Gertrude Bell, probably, because obviously Gertrude Bell was very, very important in setting up the Iraq Museum and in developing antiquities laws in Iraq, and really raising the profile of archaeology in Iraq. And interestingly, before the First World War, probably her most important contribution to archaeology was the study of the palace of Al-Uqaydir, which is near Kufa in Iraq. And this is an early Islamic palace from the 700s. It's an immense structure. It's incredibly interesting. And Gertrude Bell spent several months recording and studying this building. And it's evident from reading her account of the building that she was really very interested in Islamic archaeology and the potential of studying Islamic buildings and looking at how Arabia interacted with Iraq in the early Islamic period. So she's really incredibly interested in this. But after the First World War, for various reasons, I think she was persuaded that Islamic archaeology was kind of somehow not fashionable or not relevant to perhaps British interests. And so when she set up the Iraq Museum, she really, I think she was convinced that actually she should put more energies into promoting the pre-Islamic archaeology of Iraq. So that's sort of the particular case of Gertrude Bell. And I think from that you can extrapolate much wider to the fact that I think much of Near Eastern archaeology has been developed originally it was carried out by people who are either wealthy or had very wealthy sponsors, and a lot of institutions built up around these people. And really the demand was to look at pre-Islamic civilization, because that was somehow thought to be connected with the development of Western civilization, whereas for deep cultural reasons, Islamic or Muslim civilization is thought to be something very different. It's very different. And there's a feeling, and I've seen this in many places, even in Turkmenistan from the Russians, the idea is that what's interesting in the Middle East or Central Asia, what's interesting internationally is the pre-Islamic remains. And the Islamic remains, therefore, are of only local importance to local people. And so whilst evidently they are of importance to local people, they do have international importance, but the idea is that they somehow never contributed to wider world civilization, which I would certainly dispute. I mean, I didn't really have time to mention it, but certainly there's a lot of, well, certainly the religious schools which were developed in Basra, and then intellectually in terms of mathematics, the importation of Indian numbers and the development of integration of Indian with Hellenistic ideas of mathematics and philosophy. All of this intellectually, Basra was incredibly important, but it's just been overlooked because of, I suppose, forms of prejudice really, and also because I think probably some of this obviously goes back to things like the Crusades, but also just this idea that fundamentally we're somehow not connected with, that we, meaning Europe, America, the West, is somehow not connected to Muslim civilization, whereas I'd say it's integral to the development of modern civilization. Yeah.
Thank you. We've had a question come in from YouTube from Mustafa Al-Sanab, which is asking if there are any future plans for the site and new excavations.
Yes.
And we've had another question after that about Islamic archaeology, so which we'll come to after.
Okay. Well, just about yeah, there are plans. I mean, obviously, there's a few problems at the moment. Both to do with coronavirus, and also there were some problems in Iraq quite recently, political problems. But yes, the plan is to actually carry out excavations. And one thing which I should have probably mentioned in terms of the results from the boreholes, carbon-14. So I'll just say this briefly, just because about targeting excavations. Part of the idea of the geoarchaeology is to target sites, locations for excavations where we'd be able to find the very earliest layers, because we're very interested in these, to see A, if there's a pre-Islamic settlement. We know there were some pre-Islamic settlements, but B, really if we could get some insight into this very, very early settlement, which would be incredibly interesting. So we wanted to find out the best places. Immediately in the vicinity of the mosque, it was not very good, basically because we carried out about 10 boreholes there, but all of them we encountered huge masses of fired brick. Fired brick is which we think is generally from the 8th, 9th century onwards, a bit later, but it just would have made it incredibly difficult to excavate. But about 300 meters to the south, the boreholes found areas where there wasn't such dense concentrations of this very hard fired brick, but instead there's mud brick. And there we did a series of 6 boreholes, which reached on average, well, up to 7 meters in depth. And we got a series of deposits, cultural deposits, including ceramics, wood, reeds, and remains of bone. And we encountered the water table at about nearly 6 meters. And the dates from that, so from the very earliest layers, we've got a radiocarbon date of between 598 and 669 AD with 95.4% probability, which is incredible. So that actually means that we've probably got these very early layers of occupation of the site represented, and also in practical terms, that area doesn't have huge masses of standing structures or to get through. So yeah, we do hope to be able to return to that area to carry out excavations and to get a real insight into this very early settlement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we've got time for one more, Ben, question from Rob. Rob's asked how the rejection of Islamic archaeology is linked to the rejection of Arab nationalism in British post-World War I policy.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah, interesting. I think I'd characterize it, well, partly as neglect, really, partly as neglect, because I suppose to a certain extent there's limited funds, and to justify doing any archaeology abroad, I suppose there has to be sort of kind of very good justification. And I suppose to a certain extent, there's been nobody really who's had the perhaps the celebrity status or whatever to advocate for Islamic archaeology or the wealth. So really there's been no real focus on that. And also there's also, I'd say the other problem is from within Muslim society, although it's kind of recognized as very important. I think, again, the fact that it's not recognized internationally has meant that it hasn't really developed within Muslim majority countries in that way. But in terms of sort of Arab nationalism, I think the problem has probably been that I suppose the way archaeology is developed within, say, Syria and Iraq has been I suppose perhaps controlled by one-party regimes, which have actually probably been slightly worried about the interpretation of archaeological remains in perhaps a way which was not conducive to their interests, and therefore I suppose the archaeology has tended to be not very questioning and more simply about preserving remains rather than actually questioning the nature of early Islamic societies.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's fascinating. It's something that's always interested me. I mean, looking at other parts of the Middle East, you very often see 20th century British archaeological activity where it has happened has concentrated on the areas that I think it has felt safe. So there's lots of Crusader remains. There's lots of pre-Islamic remains. Yeah. And then there's a kind of stunning, sort of ignoring whole of the activity. And somebody who's used to kind of more holistic landscape archaeology, it just really strikes you.
Yeah, I think part of it as well is that I think that well, one of the things is that unlike, let's say, the Crusaders or pre-Islamic civilizations, there's a perceived problem that Muslim civilization culture is still very much a live culture. And I think there's on one hand, there's kind of a worry about that. There's a worry about interpreting something which you think might be not yours to interpret. I think this is a wrong belief, but I think that's one of the things. But also it is just kind of you're right, it's a stunning non-recognition of this huge culture which we know interacted with medieval Europe on a huge scale, but it's somehow sort of kind of, yeah, and you're right in terms of like this huge excavations, and I suppose the Crusader period is a very good example, because of course that is a medieval period, and so it's not to do with the actual age of the things, it's to do with their kind of cultural connections. So so Crusader is thought to be all right because it somehow relates to us. But I'd argue that it relates to us as much as, that Islamic stuff remains relate to us just as much. And also, there's also another important thing, even just simply for context, understanding Crusader archaeology, you can't really understand that without understanding the wider context. Otherwise, it's just, you're just looking at something in real cultural isolation, which means it tends to perpetuate certain views of the Crusader period, I suppose, as well.
Thank you. And on that note, we're probably drawing to the end of our time, so I'll pass back to Ben to close. But in the meantime, Andrew, thanks very much for that.
Okay, thank you. Good. Nice to talk to you. Yeah, good.
And back to you, Ben.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Andrew. Again, that was a fascinating lecture and some really good discussion questions at the end there, and a really nice one to close on from Rob. So I'm sure all of the audience would join me in a virtual round of applause. Thank you for the lecture. It was absolutely fascinating, and hopefully we'll get back in the not too distant future.
Yes.
Continue some more fieldwork. Clearly there's a huge area that could be investigated, and yes, hopefully it'll be able to continue in the not too distant future. So thank you very much, and
thank you.
I'd just like to remind everybody before we do close that we have the next guest lecture is occurring next Tuesday. So that's Tuesday, the 10th of November at 5:30 in the afternoon. We'll have Rachel Kiddie from University of Oxford talking about migrant materialities and archaeology of forced displacement in contemporary Europe. So do please feel free to log into that one. And Andrew, if you'd like to join in, you're more than welcome to log into that as well.
Thank you.
And watch the lecture. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
And hopefully we can have you over to Bradford for a proper curry after the next one.
Yeah, one day it will go. This thing, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Right. Okay, thanks. So
enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Okay,
Thanks.
right.
And I'll see you tomorrow, Andrew.
Yeah, okay, right, okay. Right, I'll just work out how to, yeah, okay, thanks.
Bye.
Cheers, Karina. Have a good rest of the evening.
Cheers. Oh, Ben.
Yeah.
Oh, are we finished recording? Are we stopped recording? Are the dates then going